I would like to call the Legislative Task Force on Child Protection to order. We are so excited that you are here. As you could tell from the agenda, it's really robust. There's a lot happening on the agenda, but we think it's going to be a great session. There's a couple housekeeping notes that I'd like for you to know. Number one, each agenda item has been given an allotment of time, and so I'm hoping that the leaders within those respective discussion areas know that I'm going to be timing everyone and that you share the time with your colleagues so that we can have a great and robust discussion. I am always excited to co-chair with Representative Pinto. As you see, Chair Pinto sitting to my left, and we're going to have him say a few words. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge the young lady who's in the black and white coat there, right there, who is at the top there. This is her first hearing with me. That is Taylor Tidwell Bennett. She is now my committee legislative assistant because Alexis, who's done a great job, is now taking another job. And so we are excited to have Taylor, and we're so excited for all the great work that Alexis is going to do with Ramsey County. So Ramsey County, folks, you gained another great person. So we are excited about that. So with that being said, when you get a chance, welcome Taylor when she is walking about. And now I'm going to turn it over for a few words from our co-chair, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so glad to be with everybody. And I am a Ramsey County both employee and resident employee in my outside job, but then a resident as well. So I'm especially excited to have Alexis be joining us. And thank you, Chair, for putting together this hearing today. I'm really looking forward to the presentations. A reminder to all of us, I guess, a little bit to myself as well, that this last session, there were a number of both substantive reforms and then also kind of process reforms to get to additional substantive reforms that passed. We had a review of those at the last hearing of the task force in July. I'm looking forward to seeing reports and information coming out in the coming legislative session, and then very much looking forward to, as I say, the hearing today, and then seeing how we can continue to work together to improve Minnesota's system to make sure that every child has the chance to thrive and be safe. And so looking forward to the conversation today, and turn things back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Pinto. As you can see, the House members are with us, and the senators are on Senate time. Just so you know, in all fairness to them, some are also a part of sports gambling or gaming hearing that's happening simultaneously, or at least today. So we just will welcome them when they come in, and just know that they all will have the information that you have supplied, and we will make sure that they are engaged. So I'm going to start. We have an overview from the Youth Interventions Working Group report. And so I'm going to call up Lisa Bailey, who is the Director of Safe Communities at Hennepin County, to come join us at the table. And then Ms. Bailey, once you get here and introduce yourself for the record, then as the presentation goes along, you can introduce whoever is going to be the next speaker. And I know that Commissioner Lundy is also on his way, but we know that you are certainly capable of starting us off. So welcome, and introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lisa Bailey. I'm the Director of Safe Communities at Hennepin County, and I'm accompanied by Mary Ellen Hang, and I'll allow her to give you her new title.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Mary Ellen Hang. I'm the Acting Director of Hennepin County's Department of Community Corrections and Rehabilitation. Before I assumed that role a couple months ago, I was the Director of Justice Initiatives and Program Performance, and in that role, I led the team that supported the working group on youth interventions.
Thank you and welcome. And so who's going to start us off? Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ellen. I'm here. I've been called in at the last moment to fill the shoes of Commissioner Lundy, who may or may not be coming in while we're speaking. So I'm going to allow Mary Ellen to start us off. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think, do we have our slide deck?
Where's the laptop?
Oh, yep.
And while they're finding that laptop and getting that situated, that would be great. To the members, you have a working group on youth interventions packet. And that is what they will use in order to start from. And I won't charge this lapse in time against you all when it comes to time.
Thank you.
And let us know if you need anything.
It is just setting up our, it's one of those mornings, I think.
Hey, it's one of those mornings.
Well, I will go ahead and get started when our.
That'd be great.
When our deck comes up, I know you have a copy. So in 2023, during the legislative session, Hennepin County advocated for the creation of the Working Group on Youth Interventions. We recognize that a collaborative and regional system is crucial to finding effective and lasting solutions for the youth that are coming into both our DHS systems and our correction systems. So during the 2023 session, the Working Group on Youth Interventions was created. And the group was tasked with a few things: to identify gaps in services for both youth and family, identify the barriers to the youth receiving those services, and then look at the disparities that we know still exist in our system. We were tasked with developing recommendations for a regional system of care, looking for sustainable finance models, and then alternatives for criminal penalties for youth as well. Some of what we learned in that 5 months that we worked was that there are right now some limited resources, both for our providers in the community and for staffing, and that is impacting the services that we're able to give to our youth. So building out this regional approach is a way to sustainably grow a continuum of care that will help address some of these barriers and gaps. One of the key barriers that needs to be addressed is the licensing and certification requirements in the state. They dictate what type of facility youth may go to, what programming is available to the youth, and they impact our community partners as they try to provide services for youth as well. So the focus of our working group was not just youth in our correction system, but it was youth who had been adjudicated either a child in need of protective services or a youth adjudicated delinquent. So we really focused on the back end of the system. What happens once they've been adjudicated, and what can we do for those youth? With that said, the members, we couldn't have that discussion, and we tried to stay focused on our charge, but we couldn't have that discussion without also talking about some of the proactive work that we know is equally important and that goes on in all of our counties and our communities. But we really were tasked to focus on that back end of the system. What we learned is that the door that the youth enters into can often dictate the facility that they're able to go to and the type of services and whether they can continue to receive those services as they go back and forth. Many of these youth go back and forth between the DHS system and the correction system, and that can often interrupt their services and create additional barriers for the youth and their family. And again, this is tied to the licensing and certification. So that's one of the key areas that needs to be looked at. Unless some changes are made to those requirements, some of these barriers are still going to remain for our youth and for our families. Our membership we were a large group. I think we were 26 members, and it was a very broad group. We had experts from both DHS and the Department of Community Corrections. We had providers. We had individuals with lived experience. And so we had a really broad members. And what I will say is it was my first time working with a group like that, and the members worked very, very well together, and all perspectives were welcome, and there was a robust discussion. And I think that we had a really great group that was all very focused on trying to be unified in coming up with some recommendations and solutions. And I think it was a really unique group, and a credit to those members. We did a lot of work in a short amount of time, and they were extremely dedicated and showed up to each and every meeting. We had a short amount of time to do our work. We had 8 meetings in 5 months. During that time, we had a lot of data presented and analyzed and discussed. We had both oral and written testimony from subject matter experts within both systems, from current and former providers, and we had some really moving testimony from a young woman who had lived experience in the juvenile justice system. If you go onto the Legislative Coordinating Committee's website, they have videos of all our meetings. The October meeting was where the young woman, Layla, spoke, and it's really one of the more moving testimonies I think all of us had seen, and the courage that she showed to speak to a group like that so eloquently and really share her experience really honestly. I think it really set the tone for the next few meetings where we had that testimony and really provided us some helpful insight. And so I think as we move forward, making sure that piece is captured, those people with lived experience, is crucial to continuing to do all of this work. For us on the support team, as we tried to figure out the best ways to support this work in a short amount of time, we broke up kind of our task into 3 research areas. And we focused on really trying to get a handle on what are the current approaches that we have, the current services and facilities that we have in Minnesota to address the youth. These youth have some complex mental health needs. They have trauma. They need a lot of services to help address that. We focused on licensing and certification in Minnesota, trying to bring a subgroup together to really understand more of the intricacies of those 2 areas. And then we did some research looking at best practices across North America. And our support team looked at, I think, 9 states that have done some transformative work in their states on this. And out of that best practices work, we found some kind of key concepts that emerged that really helped kind of frame up our recommendations. In the states that were really doing well with their youth, they had a strong continuum of care. And that continuum of care allowed the youth to move both forwards and backwards and keep their services intact as they move, no matter where their journey was, because it's not always going to be a forward journey. They're going to have backward steps, and the system needs to be able to allow that movement and allow those services to stay continuing and to support the family. They all had strong educational components for the youth. So while the youth, especially if they were in corrections, they were still receiving education, and that seemed to be a real key. They had made some robust changes to their facilities to try to make them more therapeutic, and some really intentional spaces to try to support the youth while they were in the facilities. They all had strong family and caregiver involvement at every stage when the youth came into the system, and trying to also provide some additional supports for those family members so that when the youth returned to the family and the community, everyone was having supports and having their needs addressed. And then the final kind of key component was not waiting until the very end to start aftercare or transition planning. That planning often started from day one when the youth walked in the door, so that as they got closer to discharge, they had a really strong, robust plan in place so that the youth, when they returned home or into their community, they had a plan to continue engaging in services and getting that support. So as I said, part of our work was really looking at data, and we used a variety of data sources for our group. We got data from the courts, we got data from the Department of Human Services, Department of Corrections, and then we did surveys to both some of existing community providers, and we did a survey to, I think it was the 13 juvenile detention facilities throughout the state. And so getting all that data and analyzing it was really informative. We all tried to be really data-driven in our decisions, and this was a key component. A lot of work was done, and we appreciate everyone that helped support that with providing us that access to data. But we did find in looking at the data that there are some limitations that impact our ability to use our data that I think need to be thought about and addressed moving forward as we build out a new system. For one, the DHS data, we were able to get demographics, including the race of the youth, but we had to request a court order from Chief Justice Hudson to get that from the courts because of the court rule. And she very graciously granted that order, so we had access to that data. But we discovered that the two sides don't always track the same data. They don't have the same data available. They don't use the same terminology. And there were gaps in data for both systems that made it difficult sometimes to piece it all together, especially in the short time that we had. And then a big barrier moving forward that I think we're dealing with as we work with our regional group to move forward is how do we effectively and appropriately share data. That can't be done lightly because it's very, sensitive data, but we do need to look at how can we more effectively share data, especially because these youth go between the two systems, and the data sharing between the two systems often isn't as robust as it needs, and that can create gaps in services and barriers for those youth. So what we came up with from the group in our report was we did identify some significant barriers that hopefully can be addressed as we move forward. And no surprise, one of those is our resources. Resources vary throughout the counties in this state. And depending on where you live, you may have robust amount of resources, both within your own government system and within your providers. The licensing and certification provided a big barrier. Funding was a barrier in all of the ways that these providers and that receive funding. We heard from our community providers that testified that they are on kind of a more reimbursement system, and it's often hard to stand up a facility or a program waiting for that reimbursement. And then, as I said, the data sharing and the data challenges are unique. And then just sharing the limited workforce resources. We've all seen our workforces shrink, and everyone is competing for those staffing resources, and that's not helpful. So figuring out a more regional way to share those resources beneficial for everybody. And then the impacts that we found is Minnesota kind of having this two-track system often is not helpful for the youth because they do go back and forth. They bounce back and forth between being a child in need of protective services or in the DHS system, and then perhaps they act out, they get charged with a delinquent offense, and now they're in the justice system, and often moving back and forth, the services have to stop because of the funding or the certification. And those interrupted services have a really negative impact on the youth. That was one thing that Ms. Layla said in her testimony, was that she finally got into a program where she thought she had some really great support and a mentor, and then she got moved and she lost all of that connection and had to start over. And for her, she was able to overcome that, but she said it was very, very difficult. And I think that testimony really resonated with our members, that she finally found something that worked and clicked, and then it was taken away. And then, of course, the racial disparities. One of the things that we discovered was we found a report from 1999 that the legislature had asked for, and many of the things in that report, and there's a link to that 99 report in our report, a lot of the issues were the same, and one of the things we were really struck by is that 1999 report had some demographic data around racial disparities. And in 25 years, we all know there's been a lot of really good work done by many, many people to really address those disparities. So it's not like we're sitting still, but those numbers were almost identical to the disparity data that we had when we analyzed the data 25 years later. And I found that really shocking, and I think the members did, because we've done a lot of good work to try to address that. So while the gap in the disparities haven't gotten worse, we really haven't moved the dial much when we're talking about these youth. So out of all of that, we came up with a bunch of recommendations, about 30 recommendations.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I see also on the impacts, and I was listening for it, that you said that on your impact sheet, it says cultural and linguistic differences play too small a role in programming.
Yes.
Programming development. Can you highlight that and tell me, why that was an impact, or what did you all see there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we heard some testimony from some of our tribal nations, and they really emphasize for their youth that often the services that they're able to access are not necessarily geared culturally for their youth, and that it can't be a one-size-fit-all, and we need to ensure that youth have services available and supports available that really support their cultural and their linguistic differences that they have in their communities. That and even when a youth maybe is brought from up north down to the metro, we are not as prepared to have those services that support their culture and the specific needs that they need to help them reintegrate back into their community. And so that was something that was brought up, and I think is a critical point, that as we move forward, as we build out services, they need to be trauma informed, they need to be culturally responsive, whatever that looks like, so that the youth have all of that support that they need. And we heard that loud and clear.
And what about training? What impact did staff training have on the system?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Training came up in a few ways. One way that I think was a little unexpected was just the ability to provide training for staff. These jobs are very difficult. They are suffering from staffing limitations and staffing shortages. So while everyone who runs a facility or program says, yes, we need training often, we need updated training, but how do we get that training to our staff? That requires pulling staff basically off the floor, out of their job for an hour or a day. And so we can design trainings all we want, but we have to be thoughtful of how are we then actually going to give the staff the time they need to do the training and do it in a meaningful way. Just to sit and breeze through it, does that land with them? Are they able to absorb that training and then use it? So that was one way that training was discussed. And the other way was then part of that training needs to be training staff, going back to the first point, that there needs to be some training around the cultural and linguistic differences for these youth and for the trauma. And that if we're not training staff on those pieces, then that doesn't allow them to be as effective when they're interacting with the youth in their jobs. And so that training piece, I think on both of those areas was really critical and needs to be looked at in finding a better way to provide that training so that it's also really meaningful and impactful.
And you were going to talk about recommendations.
Thank you. So in looking at and doing all of the work, the working group came up with basically 6 broad areas for recommendations. And the first is to build out a regional system of care. And within that is finding a way to either better manage or perhaps do away with this dual track so that it doesn't matter how the youth comes into the system. but that they're able to move within that system and have the appropriate care that they need. And then the key, and one of the things that the working group really emphasized, is that we recognize that as we build this out, it is important to try to keep youth as close to home and community and connected to community as we can. And that is both for the youth and for their family. We did hear that if the youth has to go further away, then the hardship on the family in being able to stay connected with that youth while they're in that facility is difficult. And then we really need to have some further study on the governance and oversight, and that includes the licensing and certification. How can we improve that to basically build out that robust regional approach and the continuum of care that we need? No surprise, we had a lot of recommendations around fiscal strategies. Funding is everything, and how do we provide funding that can support this work? I touched on a little bit, we heard from the providers that sometimes the reimbursement system doesn't allow them to build out their facility and their program the way they want to because they're having to wait for that reimbursement. And so finding a way, especially if we want more community providers, providing that funding so they can get that started and sustain that within the community. A lot of recommendations around the data, and I already touched on many of the data limitations that we found. And then the programming, making sure that we have a lot of programming and that it is really geared to touch on all those things we've talked about, trauma-informed, culturally appropriate, and supportive for both the youth and the family. And then looking at our workforce and how do we continue to build out that workforce so that they are robust, so that they are properly trained, and that they are positioned to do the work to support the youth that are in our facilities. So out of that working group and those recommendations, we recognized in Hennepin County that, there's a lot of work still to be done. I think like I said, that working group worked really hard, and I think the recommendations are really, really sound and very thoughtful as what needs to be looked at. But more work needs to be done. And so in doing that and looking at what can we do, Hennepin County has been tasked to kind of lead this new coordinated regional approach to try to see if we can move some of this forward with some of our county partners. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bailey. She's leading that effort for Hennepin County, and I'm going to let her address the next steps that we're taking.
Ms. Bailey, welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mary Ellen noted, the working group really identified the enormity and the urgency of this problem and the need to act now, and also really identified the fact that we've got this two-tier problem with the DHS and the DOC youth coming in different ways, and we need to address these in a thoughtful way and not only look at the post-adjudicated youth or youth coming in through the delinquency world. And the very first recommendation that Mary Ellen pointed out was this recommendation to develop a regional system of care across the state. But really, we need to get started on that. There's a lot of work to do to figure out what does that look like. So Hennepin has decided to advance this work by bringing together a group of counties to essentially develop this regional system of care and do this as what we hope will be a model for the rest of the state. We've convened a multi-county work group, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, which is working with all deliberate speed and urgency to assess the gaps in the continuum of care, to coordinate and work on coordinating resources across county lines, and possibly develop a formal structure. And I say possibly because we're just starting and we're figuring this out. Develop a formal structure to move forward with figuring out what that looks like. What does collaboration between the counties look like in this world? And I do also just want to emphasize again that we're talking about addressing the needs of youth with complex mental health needs, no matter how they enter the system. So we're addressing the needs of the youth first, and then figuring out how to do that depending on how they come into contact with the county. And if you're following, I'm on slide 11 now. So why are we doing this? What is the deal with a regional approach? Why is that any better than what we have now, given all the resources that are in place? Well, as Mary Ellen identified, a regional approach really allows counties to work together to address the needs. Instead of competing for limited resources, we know no one county can do all of this and provide the entire continuum of care alone. And so by allowing counties to share resources such as possibly providers, staffing, to share, come together on unified definitions of what the different standards of care are, all of these things, we think that can better meet the needs of the youth. Counties can leverage their individual and collective strengths. So some counties may specialize in one area of the need or the continuum, and some other counties will specialize in others. And then what we hope to do is create that continuum of care that supports the youth. The keys to doing this well, we believe, are having a shared vision and values and a commitment to serving the youth with shared definitions, as I said, and criteria and goals, and then possibly developing this governance structure. Part of that we'll need to work on how we're sharing data, programming, and other resources after that. So I talked about the approach, this sort of continuum of care approach. What we also need then is this framework, which, and now I'm on slide 12 now. The framework is really what's going to provide structure to this approach. And again, we're doing this to provide services based on the needs as opposed to how they enter the system. The framework, as you can see on the slide, is we will ultimately be able to provide services from the full continuum, whether prevention services, crisis stabilization, the entire mental health placement continuum, and then ongoing community after support and aftercare. Now that's a lot. That would be the full spectrum of services. We will be focusing to begin with on this placement concern and the placement issues. We know that youth of color are disproportionately impacted and affected and represented in both human services and the juvenile justice system. We also know that these youth have underlying trauma needs and unmet mental health needs. So we're envisioning a system that would acknowledge those root causes of youth and the trauma caused by youth and their families, one which is trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, and family-centered. Treatment options will need to be, as Mary Ellen noted, culturally responsive and accessible throughout the different communities. So how are we doing this? How are we coordinating this regional approach? This is something new. We're currently working with other counties to build out this regional framework. The participating counties at this point are Hennepin, Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Scott, Ramsey, and Washington counties in the metro area, as well as St. Louis, Olmsted, and Stearns counties. And we know that that's not a geographically contiguous group, but it is, for the most part, we've got the metro counties, and then we also have counties with shared vision and values around this topic. As I've said before, we want to center youth and family and the community support system throughout this. We really are making this commitment at the beginning that everyone who's participating in this framework has this shared value system and a commitment to the youth development, again, no matter how they enter the system. We have understanding all of this that we need to develop this entire continuum. We also recognize that there's some immediate, really urgent things that need to happen. Hennepin County has committed to building out and addressing this urgent need for crisis stabilization. And to do that, Hennepin is building out a youth crisis stabilization center at its county-owned facility, which is already located at 1800 Chicago Avenue South in Minneapolis. When this is up and running, which we estimate will be by this summer, it will consist of 10 to 15 beds for short-term stays of 30 to 45 days. The center will serve county-involved youth with complex mental health and behavioral needs, again, regardless of which system they enter. Within Minnesota's existing placement options, functional capacity is severely limited, and in some cases, it's completely unavailable. And so what happens is this leads to delays in connecting youth to services. So youth come into the system in some way, they've been detained, or they've been, it's been deemed that they need to be detained or held for their own safety or for that of others, but there's literally nowhere for them to go while the next steps are being figured out. This crisis stabilization facility, we hope, will address that need and that gap. And it's residential crisis stabilization services.
We have a question. Senator Hoffman.
So you mentioned 1800 Chicago. That's where the chemical, you have a wonderful facility down there, Hennepin County. It's very active and busy. Would you be taking beds from that already existing, or is there space that isn't being used? Because that's already something that needs to be looked at as far as capacity-wise. Thank you.
To the testifier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Hoffman, you've absolutely identified this. This is definitely, you're definitely correct. That building is already in use. It's a quite large building. Hennepin owns the entire thing. It's actually in an H. The architecture, it's formed in an H. One wing of it is currently being used. This new facility will be in the other wing, and so it will be completely separate. It will have a separate entrance, separate, everything will be completely separate by it, will be designed that way.
And Mr. Chair.
Senator Hoffman.
And thank you. I'm very familiar with the facility. Is that wing that you're talking about, that is currently not being utilized? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, it was being
the
utilized for
testifier.
some county offices, but it has been emptied out and will be used only for this facility.
Any follow-up, Senator Hoffman?
No, Mr. Chair, I do have some at the end we can talk about, but thank you very much. Thank you. Sounds like a good plan.
All right, Ms. Bailey, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr.
before we
Chair.
go to questions.
During those short-term stays, youth will have access to treatment and therapeutic supports while triaging, and will have assessment and planning, and all of that will take place with families, as part of that process.
Ms. Bailey, anything else?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just losing my place here. I will just go and move on. I don't know that we have, and I'll be happy to entertain questions about that facility as we move on. In terms of the long-term, I just addressed the short-term immediate response. In terms of the longer-term response, that's again setting up this regional system of care that we're looking at. County partners are meeting quite rapidly to meet and develop a comprehensive implementation plan for this. It will be implemented on a staggered rolling basis. In other words, we're going to find out what can we do immediately that will have an impact for this continuum, and then there'll be other efforts that will take more time. We will prioritize those services which, of course, can provide the most immediate needs. This regional working group is also, in addition to doing things internally, will be recommending numerous policy proposals and legislative funding proposals this session. We've identified several key policy areas and funding needs, and these are all based upon the recommendations of the Working Group on Youth Interventions. The four key policy areas are licensing and certification, and that includes a recommendation to establish a legislative task force to further study the licensing and certification rules and propose amendments. So in other words, to actually get that piece of it moving. Medicaid benefit policy proposals, including full implementation of the inmate exclusion and reentry waiver. Mary Ellen had referred to this earlier, that there's a need for more coordination prior to discharge and immediately after discharge for youth who are in placement. We're requesting essentially the state to implement a requirement that has already been required by the federal government, but this would allow for expanded services and for Medicaid coverage for that. For reimbursement and rate structure analysis, we're including asking for implementation of the 2023, or beginning implementation, I should say, of the 2023 non-residential rate study recommendations. We're also asking for a review of the funding model for residential children's facilities. And that's the funding model used by the counties. We would we're asking DHS to review that funding model and make recommendations and create a temporary fund for the 7 existing children's residential facilities while that, to be used as a bridge payment while that financial model review is being done. And finally, to allow for the creation of multidisciplinary teams for youth with complex mental health needs. Currently, that's allowed for youth who are being at risk of sexually trafficked, and we'd ask that youth who are within this particular definition also be allowed to have multidisciplinary teams. We've also asked for some funding for, again, these are for immediate things that we think can have an immediate impact on the continuum of care. They are around training, around some rate increases, or I should say rate incentives, funding incentives for staffing, and support for critical frontline and clinical staff, for some immediate funding for programming that is missing at the moment in the juvenile detention centers, or shelters, as well as care coordination with community mental health or transitions out of care. We've also, it also includes some funding to help with the capacity of some existing facilities and effectiveness of potential redesign or plans for future redesign of existing facilities. Finally, we're asking for, included in the funding request is for establishing this regional framework rather, and that includes things like developing the data sharing process and the governance. The bottom line is that this new group is taking the recommendations and the work from the working group on youth interventions and is taking it to the next steps. We've decided, Hennepin has made a commitment to lead this, but is doing it very much in partnership with the other participating counties. We see that this is something that will take this work forward and address the urgency of the need.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Now, this is a time and opportunities given for the committee to ask some questions. And I think Senator Hoffman, did you have a couple questions?
Mr. Chair, and I think that, I'm looking at the time and you have a full schedule in front of you, but I think it would be important if you could maybe follow up with us the who's of it that from like Anoka County. And the reason I ask that is that when you think regionally and you think 1,800, that's always been hard for people in Anoka County to bring youth to the cities, and that's where I always been. Michael, you've been some of the conversations about what's missing in the North Metro, and so I'd just be interested to find out who is from the different counties that are on this task force. And you don't have to talk about it now, but maybe a follow-up to the committee, and then as we talk about later. I guess it's right here in front of me, and I didn't even bother taking a look because it's like right here if I go to the next page. So just ignore that question, but thank you for that. It's a deep need out there. It really is. And then the other thing, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Senator Hoffman.
when you talk about regional, I mean, the Department of Human Services, DCT, you have these, everybody has a regional setup, even in the maternal child health, you know, the community health commissions or the committees that community health are there too. Are you looking at how that's going to overlay? Because embedded within those different structures, there's an intersection of services and supports and resources that should be or could be going to the population that you're helping. Does that make sense?
Ms. Bailey, or which one would like to answer that question? Ms. Bailey?
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you for that question. We are absolutely including state partners in all of this, and they're part of the working group, and we've identified that this is an issue that we have. There are many state agencies and state partners. There are other regional efforts going on, and so we want to streamline that, have some kind of a central location to bring all of these services. So we're hopeful that by creating this regional framework, we can then overlay it with these other services and streamline that. Thank you.
Any additional questions? If none, I'm going to co-chair Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my questions actually relate to the report of the working group, which I think members of the task force have. I don't know if folks in the room necessarily do, but you lay out your recommendations, and on page 31 is where they're listed, and there's the 6 areas that you have in the presentation, but then above that it says 3 key next steps that are sort of called out. And I'm just trying to understand for us in terms of kind of what we need to be thinking about next. I'll just say for those in the room, and as you're getting there, the first one is that legislative task force to further study licensing and certification of facilities and programming. It sounds like from what I heard from the testifier, Ms. Bailey, that will be one of the proposals coming out. But another one was a legislative task force to assess the current financing models in Minnesota. And just kind of trying to understand those 3, it says 3 key next steps. Are those things that you all are saying, these are the things that are the most important things to do? The report I know was from about a year ago, and you've got maybe more proposals coming now. So maybe these have been overtaken by events. But if you could just talk about kind of like what the specific next steps are coming out of the task force's work.
Ms. Bailey, or to the other testifier.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. Yes, and I'm sorry, I didn't review the report before I came, but I do think that the reason that we made those recommendations was while we had a lot of expertise on that working group, we didn't have all the needed expertise around the licensing, certification, and the financing. And we realized as we really tried to dig into those areas, we realized that was going to be a really big lift to really dig into that. And we also realized they are kind of the licensing and the certification and then the financial support for all of this work are really the keys to allowing us to grow the continuum and build out this approach. And so I think they are the starting points because with the specifics of the licensing and having this kind of dual track system, it really does create a lot of these barriers for the kids, the youth that are coming in, especially the way they come in and go between the systems. And so I think that's why there's still a recommendation for that from this new regional group is that without some adjustments to those requirements, we're only going to be able to do so much to solve this problem. And so I think that those still are 2 really key areas that need to be looked at. However, that seems appropriate to really figure out how can we create a structure that still allows for accountability and all the things that we need, but allows us to service the youth in the best ways.
Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess, and I'm not even sort of getting into the substance of it, honestly. I'm just trying to understand sort of what specifically is the working group calling for. And I sort of saw these 3 specific things, but then they weren't sort of called out in your presentation this year, but again, the report was from last year. So maybe what I'll just say for time is sort of like, if and as you have specific recommendations, right, specific things you think should be done, the more concrete and the more that they can be sort of put in our hands, the better. And it sounds like they're going to be, from your presentation, there'll be a number of proposals kind of being put in bills, I assume. So maybe what I'll ask is just, certainly as you're advancing bills, I'm going to ask if you can notify task force members, right? Because we don't all serve on the committees that would receive those bills. But then also I'm not quite clear whether the proposals include everything from those 3 key next steps and whether you're still pushing them. Again, no question about whether or not they're good ideas. I'm just sort of trying to understand specifically what the ideas are. So if you can continue to communicate with us about that going forward. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or any other reactions? So I'm certain that you all will get us that information, but I did notice that on page 9, there's some recommendations, and then also that on page 10, there are some next steps that you all were thinking about. So that would be great to have any additional information. To the committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you so very much. Thank you for all the work that you all are doing. And to the committee, you not only have their presentation that they went through, but you also have a part of your packet, the Working Group on Youth Interventions, which is the report from February 2024. All right? Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Now we're going to go to an overview of the relative caregiver kinship working group report and fiscal analysis update. I believe that we're going to start with the capable professor from Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, which is the best law school one could ever think about? I got someone down there that's not sure. Okay, thank you so very much. Thank you for being with us. And once you're ready, Professor, will you go forward? And I know that there's 3 people, and I think you know who those 3 people are. So if you can introduce the next person, that would always be helpful. And I know that one is virtual. Professor Woolman.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. I just want to make sure that the PowerPoint is showing on the screen. Do I need to do something to share this, or can?
Can someone help with the PowerPoint? We've been having little challenges with the PowerPoint.
Great. Okay, it's so nice to be here today. My name is Joanna Woolman. It's nice to see everyone. I'm so happy to be able to talk today about an issue that is critically important, and that is the often overlooked community in Minnesota of relative caregivers. Relative caregivers in Minnesota are a critical resource for children. They provide stability, community, and cultural connection for so many children in our state. They provide this stability for children involved with the child welfare system, those at risk of involvement, and really to all children who need vital family support to thrive. I am here today to honor all that relative caregivers do and to lift up additional ways to see and support them in our communities. We ask so much of this group, and I want to make sure that we are doing everything we can as a state to make their critical contribution easier. I'm here today to talk about a variety of things related to a statewide working group that has met for the last 6 months to address some of the critical needs of relative caregivers in Minnesota. At the end of this presentation, I'm also going to be addressing an additional bill from last session that is related to our desire to support relatives because it provides potentially additional financial resources to do that. First, I'd like to start with a little data to give us some context about how many people nationally in Minnesota provide and are in the vital role of relative caregiver. So about 7.8 million children nationally in 2023 were living in homes headed by relatives. And this covered a broad spectrum of types of homes, those where relatives were caring solely for children that were, for example, their grandchildren, or homes where relatives, multi-generations were living. In Minnesota, and I got this data from the American Community Survey and from our partners at Lutheran Social Services, there are about 13,000 relatives who are responsible for the care, the sole care of their own grandchildren. And about almost 33,000 relatives in the state are living in households where they are providing care for children, but also living with, in the case of grandparents, their adult children. So it's a significant number of individuals that we're talking about. The next slide I want to talk about looks at data on relative and non-relative placements in foster care. So when we talk about relatives who are desiring to be foster care parents, we sometimes refer to them as formal relative caregivers, as opposed to all the relatives in Minnesota providing care for children who may not be impacted by child welfare. This data comes from DHS, now DCYF, and there's more data to go along with this in the report that I provided to go along with this presentation. But we can see here that foster care placements with relatives are more stable than those in homes of non-relatives. And that's critically important as we think about the long-term impact and trauma associated with children who are removed from their home. Data from our department also provides that placement with relatives provides greater overall and long-term stability as compared with non-relatives. And so you can see here, there's a significant difference in the percentage of placement moves with relative versus non-relative homes. Over the last several years, Minnesota has made meaningful policy changes and financial investments to support relative caregivers in Minnesota. Specifically, several years ago, a large working group came together to overhaul our foster care licensing standards to provide better support for relatives. And we also, in the last couple of sessions, have provided significant financial resources for community nonprofits who support relative caregivers. We're seeing that these initial policy changes are working. We are, in fact, licensing more relatives than we used to in Minnesota. But I want to spend a couple minutes really talking about what relative caregivers do. Relatives who are asked to care for children who are a part of our child welfare system face unique challenges. And these relatives are different in critical ways than non-relative foster care providers. For example, they often don't have advance notice that several children will be placed in their home. Sometimes overnight, they are asked to care for 3 or 4 grandchildren without any prior warning. As opposed to individuals who are making a conscious choice over time, often in a coupled relationship, to become and plan for a foster child to be placed in their home. Additionally, relatives often don't have the same level of financial resources available as those individuals who think and plan ahead to become foster parents. Additionally, we know that family relationships are complex. We're coming off of the holidays, and we can appreciate the complicated nature of family relationships. We also ask our relative caregivers to do a lot of family dynamic management with very little therapeutic or financial support. Relatives who seek to become foster parents or those who care for children more informally are often not able to access critical financial resources that they need to best support the children in their care. One example of this is that caring for a relative or a child as a relative is not currently listed as an exception to the 60-month TANF eligibility in Minnesota, and it should be. And just like relatives are different than non-relative foster care providers, we license differently. Community foster care licensors are different than county licensors. And because Minnesota is a state-administered but county-implemented system, there are significant differences in how relatives can get licensed and the support they receive throughout that licensing process. Our community licensing partners are so much to families. They provide wraparound, long-term, holistic services to relatives seeking to get licensed and help those relatives once a child is placed in their home. Practice varies across the state, with some families in some counties getting access to information about their rights in a language they can understand and the opportunity to work with a community provider, while others do not. We need to change our laws to ensure that relatives everywhere have access to information in a way that they can understand it, that is delivered timely and in a culturally fluent manner. We also need choice. For some families, working with the county where the child was removed is triggering and traumatic, and it's critical that families have the opportunity to choose the process and partner to license them. Over the last 6 months, we brought together stakeholders to continue to work to support relative caregivers in Minnesota. Part of this effort was to explore a new opportunity through the federal government to license relatives differently. In 2023, the Children's Bureau for the first time announced that states could have a different licensing process for relatives versus non-relatives. Part of this working group was also to explore more broadly how to provide access to information and resources for the broad array of relative caregivers in Minnesota. I have some guest speakers here today to help me talk about some of the work of this group, but first I have a couple more slides to describe some tools that we used to come to the recommendations that we provided. In order to understand how to implement new standards, new foster care licensing standards for relatives, we utilized a tool that was created by our next speaker, who is going to be joining us virtually, Marina Nitze. There has been a large coalition of individuals around the country who have come together to create model licensing standards. They created a crosswalk tool. This tool illustrates the differences between Minnesota's current law and what is being recommended as a best practice nationally to license relatives. The goal of these model standards is to license relatives more efficiently and effectively without compromising safety. There's a few areas where Minnesota differs from the national model standards. Those are both in the process, so how we go about doing our background check, how we go about doing training, what it takes for relatives to actually apply. And then part of the difference between the model standards is also substantive. There are some areas in Minnesota where we have implemented additional statutory barriers that are different from what is recommended nationally. One of these areas is in our background studies provisions that relate to criminal barriers to getting licensed. In 1994, the Adam Walsh Act became law, and that set out the national standards that states have to adopt from a safety perspective to receive Title IV-E and other federal funding to support foster care licensing efforts. Minnesota differs from the Adam Walsh Act in a couple critical areas that I'll highlight today, and then our next speaker will talk a little bit more about the national landscape here. The Adam Walsh Act lays out some permanent barriers to getting a foster care license. Minnesota contains many additional criminal barriers to what the Adam Walsh Act requires, and one that I would highlight in particular for you is the crime of first-degree assault. In Minnesota, first-degree assault is a permanent bar to getting a foster care license. To give you an example of what this looks like in practice, because we did conduct a survey with licensors and this issue came up quite a bit. If someone gets into a bar fight while they're young, 18, 19 years old, and they are charged with assault, they are permanently barred from ever becoming a foster parent in Minnesota. When things are on our permanent bar list, there's no workaround. There's no exception. So for grandfathers who are much different people in their 50s or 60s than they were at 17 or 18, this particular provision is preventing, in some cases, stable grandparent relationships from being safe and secure places for their grandchildren. So I think that's a particular thing that Minnesota should take a look at. I'd like to introduce the first speaker I brought today. I think Ms. Nitsky is here, and I'm not sure how to get her up on the screen versus my PowerPoint. Marina Nitsky is a national policy expert, and she is the creator of our national model standards. She can talk a little bit about who she is, and I think she's going to present some national data to provide some context about where Minnesota is compared with other states.
All right, welcome, Ms. Nitsky. Will you identify yourself for the record and go forward with your presentation? Ms. Nitsky. I think you're muted, or at least I can't hear you. She should be able to come through the system.
There's an issue, that's why I'm competitive.
It sounds like we're having an issue with the system, so we're going to attempt to, hear you through a computer. So let's see if this works. Can you say your name again?
This is Marina Nitsa, can you hear me?
It needs to go up some more. It won't go up anymore. So I can see them working diligently over there to solve this problem. All right.
Okay.
So perhaps the professor can sort of help out a little bit.
Sure, yeah, I'm able to. Should I go to the next speaker and perhaps come back to Ms. Nitsky?
We could certainly do that because Amanda is here, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, so can we do that will you introduce Amanda and then we can, Whiting, and then we can, Whiteling, and then we can certainly come back. Hopefully, we'll have this problem solved.
That sounds great. I just have one additional, just a couple additional comments to make before the next speaker testifies. I want to quickly mention that as a part of the working group, we conducted a statewide survey of community and county licensors. And this survey identified some critical information that I think is important for this task force to understand. The results of this survey highlighted in the report show that it, on average in Minnesota, takes between 4 to 6 months to license a relative for foster care placement. This is a significantly long period of time and something that we are going to seek to address with legislation in this upcoming session. Additional barriers were also identified, including outdated disqualifications, such as first-degree assault, financial constraints, a lot of training requirements, and often logistical and transportation issues in the actual licensing process that created delays and barriers as well. And I would say anecdotally, as an attorney representing relatives, oftentimes there is a need for legal services or legal advocacy on behalf of relatives. There is no right to counsel. So for a relative who seeks or needs legal support during the process to get licensed, if they cannot afford an attorney, there is nowhere for them to go to get an attorney, which is also a significant issue. And I'm so happy to be joined today by Amanda Whiting, who is here on behalf of Evolve Family Services. And I'll hand it over to her at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Whiting, welcome to the committee. Identify yourself for the record and go forward with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the task force. My name is Amanda Whiting, and I am a foster care licensing worker at Evolve Family Services. And I very much thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak with you today. As you would know on the previous slide, Janae Curry is a relative community member who is meant to be joining us today to share some of her testimony as well. I had been texting her late last night and early this morning. She had a kiddo in the hospital and she was unable to join us today. So I have included some of her story. She's given me permission to share. Evolve has been providing child-centered family services in Minnesota for over 45 years and is a nonprofit leader in providing kinship care. Since 2016, we have served over 500 children in relative placements. 79% of the youth that we are serving are children of color, and 65% of our kinship caregivers are BIPOC. I work specifically with relatives and kinship foster caregivers, helping them to navigate and complete the requirements for foster care licensing. Additionally, I have been a kinship provider for my grandchildren, and I can speak from personal experience to the burden and barriers of licensing. But I can also speak about how rewarding the process can be. It was really lovely to have my grandchildren staying with me. I love the time that we got together, and because the children knew my family and knew my home, it made their time in foster care less scary and difficult. I was able to share with them family stories and some of our traditions, and that was in a way that supported their culture and their identity that maybe a new foster parent would not be able to. My work at Evolve allows me to serve other relative caregivers, and I am impressed by all of them, such as the aunt who relies on public transportation. In order to get her pets vaccinated for licensing, I helped her to locate a low-cost clinic, but then for that clinic, you're on a wait list. Your appointment comes when you get there. You wait in line until you can go. And her means of getting to that clinic involved taking several pet carriers on public transportation just to get there. I think of Janae, who is not with us this morning, a caregiver who I've worked with for the past year. Janae is a single parent, a single mom of 4 young children under the age of 10. She welcomed her teenage nephew into her home without hesitation over a year ago. Janae's licensing journey was far from easy. As required, Janae had to attend Evolve's in-person orientation training. This was held at a library in Inver Grove Heights. Janae relies, like I said, on public transportation, so in order to get to this training, she rode multiple buses, which took her over an hour to get there. The training itself is 8 hours long, so additionally, she had to find and afford childcare for the 5 children in her home for the 10+ hours that she was gone with transportation. Her training didn't stop there. The online trainings, such as the yearly mandated reporter requirement, were not accessible without internet, which she did not have. And without a printer, printing the certificates or any of the required licensing documents that she needed meant riding buses with her 4 young children to find a library or other facility where she could access internet, watch the hours of videos, and then print the materials. And on the topic of trainings, Janae had not ever parented a teenager before, which is not easy if any of you are parenting teenagers. While she could have used training on adolescent development or parenting strategies for raising a teen, the required trainings provided were very much early childhood focused. As this kinship licensing report outlines, allowing for individualized training that is child and family specific would be more effective and also more respectful of her family and time. Each month, Janae needed to fill out a paper form and mail it to the county in order to receive her foster care payments. While some counties offer online methods for doing this, Janae was not given that option and was told that direct deposit wasn't available. She would mail the form on the first of each month, and on several occasions, I helped her to call to try to understand why her payments were delayed. Sometimes they took weeks to arrive, which of course affected her ability to pay rent, to provide for the teens' extracurricular activities and materials. She would then have to take public transportation to deposit her checks. These small tasks become mountains for the caregivers that I serve. Thankfully, after licensing, Evolve was able to arrange automatic deposit for her, and I make a point to ask Janae what I can do to better help serve her family every time I visit each month. I print documents, I call her housing workers, I bring my own computer to play training videos, and find ways to think outside the box so that she can focus on her family. I could speak at length about Janae's licensing challenges, but I do want to comment on her commitment and her love for her nephew. She has said repeatedly that she would do anything for him and wants only for him to feel happy and safe. I've watched the child in her care come out of his shell and really come to see Janae's home as his own. He is a very talented athlete, and Janae's whole family attends his games and cheers him on. And every visit, I'm overjoyed to see Janae and her nephew joking and laughing, usually in the kitchen while making dinner. I continue to be in awe of how she cares for her relative in ways that strengthen her whole family, and that's my hope, that with these suggested actions in the kinship licensing report, we can make it easier for families to focus on family. Janae is just one of many caregivers that my colleagues and I serve, and as a team, we talk regularly about how we can tailor our efforts to help them specifically. We try to put ourselves in their shoes and consider the requirements for licensing, and I'll ask you to consider their perspective as well. Imagine that you were asked to start caring for your niece and nephew in addition to your own children. How would you rearrange your home to make sure they have their own bedroom and their own space and their own storage? What resources would you need to find them new bedroom furniture and clothing? How would you identify and afford childcare for 8 hours of in-person training and the other trainings? And how would you watch training videos without access to affordable internet? What resources would you need to balance caring for multiple children so that you could complete paperwork and hours of interviews with your licensor? And what would be your level of comfort sitting down with me, for example, a stranger, and answering questions and describing details of your past romantic relationships, losses that you've experienced, telling me about your finances, your debts, your religious beliefs, and your sexual identity, so that I can write your life story? Most importantly, how would all of this work take away from your ability to focus on the child? The licensing process is invasive and time-consuming. It involves significant paperwork, home visits, background checks, training, interviewing, and home preparation. I spend hours in client homes each month, and I find myself asking, why are these devoted caregivers needing to prove themselves capable of a task that we have asked them to do? Then I ask myself how I can lessen their burden. Children need to be safe, and ensuring that safety is necessary. However, many of the current requirements aren't effective or applicable to their situations. In fact, several of our clients have commented that the hardest part of foster care is not caring for the child or navigating family relationships, it's the process and procedure. The kinship parents I work with are incredible individuals who are doing hard work under the most difficult circumstances. When I can help provide support that mitigates even a fraction of their burden, they breathe a little bit easier and the families can thrive. It is my joy and honor to continue to find ways to respond to kinship caregivers during their times of need, and I am thankful that my organization, Evolve, supports me in doing this. If we can make adjustments to licensing that would allow foster parents to prioritize their focus on the child, it can only have beneficial outcomes, and we have the power to put children first. I'm very thankful to have been able to share some of Janae's story with you today. She exemplifies to me what it means to go above and beyond barriers to care for her relative. I ask that you take her story to heart, to consider her perspective as if it were your own, and to keep this issue alive in your mind. Her work doesn't end with today's testimony, and neither should our work to improve the system that she relies on to be a successful foster parent. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. I just want to do a time check. We have roughly 7 minutes and 38 seconds left. And I do have a question before I let you know that we've been trying to get this technology worked out, and the only thing they told me is that there's nothing else that they can do. So I know that's a bummer, so we're going to try to figure this out. We're going to try the microphone issue again, but before we go there, Professor, you were talking about that in Minnesota, it takes an average of 4 to 6 months to license a relative for foster care placement. How long does it take for a non-relative foster care person to be licensed?
I don't know the answer to that question. I can find out if there's a significant difference.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So now we want to try again with our wonderful guest speaker who is with us by way of our system here. So we're going to try. So Marina Nitzy, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Well, say hi again. We're going to try to change the placement of the microphone.
Okay, this is Marina Nitza. Hopefully this works this time.
Are you all able to hear in the audience?
Some people on YouTube. I'll try again.
Okay, try one more time.
Okay, this is Marina Nitza. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the others can't hear you, unfortunately.
Okay.
Anyone else have a different suggestion? So the only thing I think we can do is have the professor talk about some of the things that you were going to cover, and I apologize, and perhaps when we get another opportunity later that we'll try to, but it doesn't work. It doesn't matter that way. Okay, so Professor?
Yeah, I think what I might suggest, just given the time, is that, and I'm so sorry, Marina, that this isn't working out, is I would maybe ask if she could record some of her brief comments, and I can just share that with members of the committee, if that would be okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, I think that would be good. She's amazing, and I'm not her, and so I don't think I could do justice to the national overview. So I will work with her to get that into a video and send it your way.
And I'll be happy to distribute that to the committee. And thank you, Professor, as well as to the guest testifier, Ms. Nitzy, for being understanding. As you will see and know, that one of the reasons why we wanted to hear from Ms. Nitzy, because she has an impressive background. As you probably heard, that she's a fellow at New America's New Practice Lab, where she works on improving America's foster care system through the Child Welfare Playbook and Working Group. Marina was most recently the Chief Technology Officer of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs under President Obama. After serving as a senior advisor on technology in the Obama White House, and as the first entrepreneur in residence at the U.S. Department of Education, she serves on the advisory board of Foster America. So we will get that video, we'll circulate it, and we'll try to find a way to make that video public as well. Professor Woolman.
Thank you. Before I wrap up today, I do want to take a couple minutes to talk about a bill from last year that I think is related to our efforts to improve Minnesota's child welfare system, and that's the Fiscal Analysis Bill, which was introduced last year as HF 1492. This bill would require a comprehensive fiscal map of Minnesota's child welfare streams to help DCYF, our counties, tribes, and our community partners better understand all of the available funding opportunities to better help Minnesota access available federal funds, state funds, and county funds. With the creation of the new agency, it's a great opportunity to get a baseline map of financial opportunity. Other states have used this process of a fiscal analysis effectively, and I want to highlight in particular a couple pieces of information. First, there's been a significant increase nationally in Title IV-E funding allocations to states since the passage of the Family First Prevention and Services Act in 2018. And you can see from the slide up here, although I think I'm operating, thank you. In particular, if you look on the right-hand side, at the prevention services, which is the fourth one down, there's been a 1,200% increase in accessing prevention funds by states since 2018. And so part of what a fiscal analysis will do, an independent fiscal analysis by someone external to our state agency, is ensure that Minnesota is able to access all prevention dollars through the Family First Preservation Services Act. And I just wanted to highlight that other states are seeing a significant increase in this funding coming through, and we want to ensure as a part of this bill that Minnesota is doing the same. The second thing I want to highlight is some anecdotal information. Well, it's not anecdotal, it's actual data, but it's one state's example. So Nebraska conducted a similar fiscal analysis where they brought in a national consultant whose entire, process and business is set up to do these sorts of statewide child welfare audits. Nebraska, since that fiscal analysis, is seeing ongoing annual savings of around $38 million and about $35 million now available annually through reinvestment efforts at the state. And so as we think about making changes, like we heard in youth services, right, in our first presentation, as we contemplate how we want to begin to more robustly support both relatives and community licensors who support relatives, I would encourage you all to get behind and support the passage of this fiscal analysis bill, because I think it provides an opportunity to learn more and potentially access additional federal funds. And the last thing I want to highlight, because it's something near and dear to my heart as a practicing attorney for parents and relatives, is that there are also new opportunities to reimburse representation, legal representation of relatives, children, parents, tribes, civil legal services, and pre-petition legal services in Minnesota. And I want to highlight that as a part of the fiscal analysis, we'll be looking at ways as well to additionally support high-quality access to and support legal representation in all of these categories. I thank you so much for your time today. I'm so sorry that we couldn't hear from Ms. Nitze, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you to the testifier. And even though there was one testifier that could not be here, you did a great job articulating her thoughts, and so I appreciate that. Any questions from the committee for any of the testifiers? Senator Aaron McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question. I was reading through some of the comments from the survey, and I mean, the first thing I wanted to just clarify is, earlier we were talking about the 18, 19-year-old that might have gotten in a bar fight and then is now a 50 or 60-year-old grandfather, and that's a permanent bar. And the suggestion is to just remove that as a permanent bar so that that person could be considered, right? It doesn't automatically allow them to, have placement, but it allows them to go through the process to be considered. Am I correct in that?
Right. So
Professor Woman.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Senator Mayquaid. Yes, Minnesota's foster care licensing process involves first doing a background check where we would identify any criminal barriers that may come up. In the case of a permanent bar, there's no opportunity to consider that person for a license. But if, for example, that were placed on the 5-year bar, that information would be always relevant and considered in making a determination. It is a very comprehensive process, as our speaker suggested, right? We are going out and asking families all sorts of things, including how their mental health is doing, what's going on with any sort of substance use, what does their home look like? And in the case of instances of prior criminal activity, either those that were convictions or that occurred, that would certainly be considered. So we have to look at allowing someone to apply is really different than giving a license. It's an opportunity to be considered. It's not like we're handing out free foster care licenses to anyone who shows up.
Any follow-ups? Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was super helpful. And then I'm looking at all of the comments from the survey, and it strikes me oftentimes when we build a system with one set of people in mind, and then we add more group types of people and we don't change the way we've identified it. Like I have a 2.5-year-old, and if we took in any one of our nibblings who is not, they're teenagers, and I was taking a car seat training, I think I would be very disillusioned with like how relevant is this for me. And so I'm really wondering about what kind of tailoring exists, if any, right now, and if there is none, what could exist? Like how complex would it be to say, okay, if you have a child who's over the age of 10, you're not taking a car seat training. And I'm also really interested, I'm reading through about the fire inspections and the, egress windows and the, all that stuff. And I'm thinking like, okay, if there's already children in the home, right? Like this person has children. Now they have someone, like their relative's child. I'm just wondering about the utility of like requiring home construction to take in a relative that could have come to you actually prior to the placement just through like informal methods. And so I just want to hear a little bit more about that.
Professor, or whoever is going to respond to that, identify yourself for the record and answer the question. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Amanda Whiting speaking. Thank you for that question, Senator McQuaid. Yeah, we have found, and specifically regarding the car seat, we try to follow I believe it's children under the age of, if they're housing a child under the age of 9, they do need to take the car seat training. And Minnesota has recently switched to what's called the BEST system, which is a little bit more flexible, allowing providers to take online training and then have people come into their home to verify that they know how to use a car seat. But it is still hard, it's taking that time, like hoping that they have the ability to find the time to go online to find the things. I think it would be really interesting, like with the fire marshal inspection, it would be really great to allow licensors perhaps to have more discretion in evaluating homes. We do the home safety checklist when we go in. We're looking for wiring. We're testing the water temperature, all of those things, which is another one. If you're in an apartment building trying to get somebody in the building to change your specific water temperature is not possible. But if we were able to be more discretional as licensors, as we are with non-disqualifying background checks, maybe there could be a bridge somewhere there. And as far as tailoring trainings, it would be really great to have a more robust trainings available so that we can find out what are the needs of this family. For example, my client, like, could we find you a teen or adolescent training versus fetal alcohol syndrome? So yeah, I think using the licensors and the organizations to get creative, have discretion in how we train and evaluate homes, I think that would go a long way.
Senator McQuaid, any other follow-up? Any other questions for any of the testifiers? Seeing none, thank you so very much. Thank you for the presentation. I look forward to getting that video that I will circulate. And my apologies again to those who are online who are planning to testify today. There will also be something you're going to hear me say for other testifiers who are going to testify by way of our technology. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I am now going to a presentation we're going to have on Foster's Advocate. And is Ariana here? Ariana Chamu. And if I'm saying your name wrong, please correct me. You are more than welcome to do that. I know that you're the interim executive director for Foster Advocates. And you may start your testimony and also correct me and help me on your last name.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Happy New Year, and thank you for having me. My name is Ariana Shimon, and I am the interim executive director at Foster Advocates. We are an organization directed by and for fosters working to improve the foster care space here in Minnesota. I'm joined today by two fellow foster leaders, Mariah and Ayan, who will be sharing their perspectives on safety and prevention, not only while in foster care, but also upon transitioning into adulthood. Thank you to them both for being here and being willing to share their stories. When we were first invited to speak today about safety and prevention for fosters, I wasn't sure where to begin. Because what does safety look like for us after we are removed from our families? When we are shuffled from placement to placement, school to school, and the only meaningful and loving relationships we know are severed. The focus naturally turns to permanency. But the reality is, many fosters do not achieve that and are then trapped in the system until they reach adulthood. There is a deep misunderstanding of what happens to our young people after that initial removal from their family, when the initial safety threat has been mitigated. It is something we do not think about, and it is often overlooked. When the state intervenes in their life, we make these young people a promise that they will be safer, they will be better off, and we know that is just not true when we look at their outcomes and we look at the data. Unfortunately, we fail to provide access to the basic resources they need, such as safe housing, access to a good education, and the stability and support to become healthy and happy adults. We invest so little in preventing family separation in the first place, and we invest even less in fosters' well-being and their futures. Many fosters are left with little opportunity to even dream. It is great to see the focus turning towards prevention on both a local and national level, and that takes time. We have to remember that in the interim, while we work towards that, many fosters are still left stuck in the system. So today, I invite you to think about this population of fosters differently and how we can do better by them. Because if our goal is truly around ensuring ongoing safety for children in foster care, then we must approach it differently and dream of better ways to invest our dollars. We should be asking ourselves, what would it look like if we invested in concrete supports to prevent young people from entering and aging out of foster care in the first place, whenever possible? And for those who can't reunify, when safety cannot be achieved, what would it look like if we invested in, for example, transitional housing and prevented the 79% of fosters who will experience homelessness by the age of 24 from ever experiencing that harm and instability in the first place? Or what if we invested more time and money into independent living resources for them earlier on in their journey? Imagine. This is all within reach. It is possible. And as a state, we've already done some great work. And I truly hope that will continue and this unique population will no longer be invisible. So I want to lift up a few things that we are doing well to invest in the 12,000 plus current and former fosters in our state. Here are a few highlights for you to focus on this upcoming legislative session. The first one is around the Fostering Independence Grant and creating a special revenue fund. As some of you might remember this past session, this program that removes the financial barrier for eligible fosters to attend higher education in Minnesota faced a $5 million budget shortfall. Together with many of you, we were able to successfully fill that gap, and now we are seeking to ensure the ongoing stability of this program and the promise we made to fosters back in 2021. For reference, just under 600 students benefited from this program this past semester alone. The other initiative is increased investment for the STAY program, or the Successful Transitions to Adulthood for Youth. This is the only state program that offers designated funds to counties and nonprofits specifically for providing independent living services and financial supports for youth as they work to transition into adulthood. As we already know, this is a significant gap and need for our community. And as a state, we have not increased our investment in nearly 20 years. We hope we can increase that in the years to come. The third initiative is changing the extended foster care program to an opt-out program. This is a program that allows folks who are aging out of foster care to continue in foster care up until the age of 21, so long as they maintain eligibility. The proposed change would provide more agency for young people to tap into this much-needed benefit. It's both additional support from the county that they are already receiving, as well as financial support. And the last one is a unique initiative, and that is around preserving survivor and SSI benefits for fosters. Although we personally are not advancing legislation on this issue, it's important to elevate to all of you. This has been an ongoing issue here in Minnesota, but nationally as well. On January 15th, Minnesota's Management Analysis and Development Group will be releasing their report and findings to the legislature. This was a requirement from the 2023 legislative session to study the issue of counties collecting these benefits on behalf of eligible fosters. It's a complicated issue, but it's an important one for us as a state to do right. So more to come on this, but we hope with this new data at our disposal, there'll be more attention to find a solution and work to preserve these funds. Last but not least, for the past 2 years, our organization has been working on the Minnesota Promise campaign. We traveled throughout the state and held listening sessions where we asked them, what would it look like if Minnesota fulfilled this promise it makes to young people? And the results were powerful. We will be releasing our formal report this spring, and we will continue to imagine how our state can truly provide safety for some of our most vulnerable Minnesotans. And we hope you will join us in that work. So before I pass the mic to Mariah and Ayan, I want to say thank you again, Senator Champion, for the invitation. We are always a resource to all of you on this important work, and I'm happy to answer any questions after our testifiers. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for that powerful information. I do have a couple questions because your voice was so soft that I think I missed a couple things, but I'll make sure I come back to you. Mariah Southwick, will you identify yourself for the record and go forward with your testimony?
Hi, I'm Mariah Southwick. Chairs and members of the task force, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. I'm 28, a foster, a college student, a resilient being, and a Minnesotan. Today, I'm here to speak to you about the nuances in the word safety as a foster. As someone who's experienced an incredible lack of safety before system intervention, during my time in care, and in my transition to adulthood, my case is often viewed as a success. What does that truly mean? I was removed from a harmful environment, placed in a safe foster home, and quickly after removal, adopted. On paper, the boxes were checked. Permanency and safety were achieved. But that's not the whole story. In truth, what the system considered a success left me feeling more lost, more displaced, and in some ways, less safe than ever before. True safety for me was found in my first foster home with Jeannie Jackson. She was the one who saw me, who listened to me, respected me as a human being, something that unfortunately was not always reflected in the decisions made by the system. At 12 years old, in the chaos of the system, I felt seen and safe in her home and in her presence. But in the eyes of the system, permanency had to be achieved at all costs, even if it meant jeopardizing my stability and disregarding my wishes completely. At 12, I was clear. I did not want to be adopted. I had 2 adoptions that were eventually dissolved before I was even 15. The first due to abuse, the second a cause of a severe decline in my mental health after I was completely cut off from my biological family, especially my grandmother. My grandma's my person. She visited me throughout my entire time in foster care, no matter where I was. And to this day, I'm still deeply connected to her. I fought hard to maintain that bond, advocated for our relationship because it kept me grounded and supported. Both of these painful experiences could have been avoided. My safety could have been preserved if my voice had been heard and respected from the start. In so many ways, I was placed in unsafe situations while in foster care and not set up for success as an adult. The system is doing what it's designed to do. It was never designed to prioritize the voices of fosters, to listen to us. Too often, people in the system don't listen to hear. They listen to respond, follow orders, check boxes, but not to understand the human life in front of them. At the end of the day, us fosters, we're left holding the true cost. We deserve better. We all have a collective responsibility to provide safety to our fosters beyond just the physical. We can and we must do better. Thank you.
Thank you for that powerful testimony. And I'm excited about the fact that you remain connected to your grandmother. You know, all data talks about how there are better outcomes when you remain connected. So thank you for that powerful testimony, and there will be an opportunity for the committee to ask you any questions if they have any questions. I'm going to now go to Ayan.
Ayan.
All right, Ms. Ali, if you would go forward by announcing yourself and then providing your testimony. Thank you so very much for being here.
My name is Ayan Ali, chairs and members of the task force. I want to tell you, thank you for the opportunity for me to speak before you. I am a wonderful and powerful Ayan, a mother of one, and I advocate for the underdogs, the ones that don't have the opportunity to be heard. I am here to speak to you about safety as someone who has survived foster care the few times it did show up, and in many ways it never did. The word safety might invoke one thing to some people, physical security or a sense of protection, but to someone like me who has survived the system, it often carries much deeper implications. Safety isn't just about being physically out of harm's way. It's about emotionally, psychologically, and cultural safety too. Feeling seen, heard, and respected. It's about belonging and knowing you're not at risk of being harmed, judged, or abandoned. Knowing you have the voice, have control over your own narrative and the spaces you inhabit. I entered care at the age of 12, placed in strange homes with strange people, talked that not to, no one looked like me, no one understood who, what, or where I came from. It took 5 years in care before I was placed with someone who had similar identities to me. Thank you to Sir Adil Gandhi for seeing me, for treating me as a whole human being. Sorry.
It's okay.
Letting me be a teen and providing the trust, connection, and love I deserved. The mentality held is we give you food, we give you shelter, somewhere to stay, you're safe. What about our mental well-being? What about our cultural and emotional well-being? Where is the love? Safety expands beyond the initiative, removal, and placement. It shows up in the ways we do and do not support fosters while in care. The information and resource or lack, therefore, provided to young people directly impacts the stability and the long terms of outcomes. If we really want to keep fosters safe before, during, and after care, we need to move beyond this one-dimensional thinking of safety. Safety is multifaceted and ever-changing. As a young person, what do you need to feel safe? How can I help you feel safe? I am a mother to a beautiful son who, without his presence to ground me at the age of 20 when I had him, I don't know where I would be. In reflecting on the ways I showed up for my son, one thing I always wanted him to know and feel is that he is loved and cared for. We willingly forget that love is safety. Emotionally, culturally, and mental care are safety. The system is not built to provide that love, but we can begin writing policies, practicing, and providing from a loving place in mind. We have to shift the mentality because what we're doing is actively causing harm every day, without a doubt. Thank you, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for providing that powerful testimony. What's your son's name?
His name is Mayan.
Oh, nice name. Thank you again. Any questions from the committee? Senator McQuaid.
I just want to thank you both so much for sharing your stories. It's hard to get up in front of people and microphones and talk about some of the hardest things that have happened to you. And I think I just want to say, too, that your stories really demonstrate, much like Ariana, you were saying at the beginning, right, when the state intervenes, there's this promise of, this is bad, we're going to help it be better. And if we don't have better on the other side of that, then we're not doing our job. And so I'm really grateful that we're able to have these conversations, especially have your stories be centered, because without people who are most impacted, then we are just checking those boxes and we're not actually doing what we're setting out to do. And so thank you for bringing your stories in here, because that helps us do the better on the other side. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as a volunteer lawyer for the Children's Law Center, I represent children in need of protective services, and I have experience with a lot of these issues. One thing that you said caught my attention about the opt-in versus the opt-out for the extended foster care services. So all of the clients I've had that have aged out of the system have all opted in to the extended foster care. And so my experience with that has been they're getting notice and advice on that program from the social worker, from the guardian ad litem, and then from me as their lawyer, and they're all very well aware of it, and then they opt into that program. But as I'm thinking about it, that maybe isn't happening in every case, and I'm not sure about that. It seems logical that maybe it isn't, and so I'm certainly open to changing that to an opt-in. That does seem to make some sense. And so I'm interested in learning more about that, and I think maybe it does come down to two. I think there is a right to, the child has a right to an attorney in theory if they're at that age. But my understanding is that that doesn't always happen in practice, and I think that's probably due to a lack of resources and then not enough volunteer lawyers doing that. And so maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit on that.
To Ariana, you want to elaborate on that? And if you introduce yourself for the record one more time.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ariana Shimon. And thank you for your question and for your volunteerism, Senator Kroon. We need more CLC volunteers, absolutely, in our state. So you are spot on. This is one of those things where it's policy versus what is actually happening in practice for this subpopulation that is in fact eligible for this extended foster care benefit upon reaching the age of 18. Now, what is supposed to happen is that around the age of 17 and a half, when we know that this young person will not be achieving permanency and will in fact be aging out of our foster care system, which I believe should be, these conversations should be happening much sooner than that. The way that it happens is that they have the conversation, they share the benefit, they go through a piece of paper that's front and back, and they have them sign it. And that is really the process on the back end. You're right to say that many CLCs and guardians ad litem hold those conversations and try to incentivize and encourage young people to tap into that benefit. Now, we, as someone who has actually received and utilized the extended foster care program in our state, it is what made all the difference for me. When I started at Foster Advocates, we did some additional research because what we were learning is that there were so many young people who were eligible for this program where they would get just over $1,000 a month as they go into adulthood to help them stabilize and build a positive future, and that only 1 in 4 were actually continuing through the age of 21 and utilizing this benefit. And what we also have learned from other fosters is that because of the harm that they experience in the system and the distrust and the relationships they had with the state, they preferred to say no and refuse just over $1,000 a month, and they chose to step away from that. And I think that paints a really significant picture we need to talk about. Now, as far as it goes with the legislative fix, this is being brought forward by DCYF after years of conversation and noticing these trends is that what we also learned in speaking with fosters is that some of them had no idea that they were even eligible for this benefit. It was a missed opportunity. It wasn't being brought up in conversation by their social workers or by other folks in their life. And so we have done a lot of work at Foster Advocates. Once we find out and we meet with them, hey, did you know you're eligible for this program? No. And then we are helping advocate to get them back into the program as soon as we are able to. And I want to say that many of these young people are experiencing homelessness. That money could go a long way. And so part of the thought and intention around this change, this simple change for an opting out versus opting in, is giving fosters more agency, more additional court oversight so that the judge has to specifically ask the social worker, why are they saying no to this additional benefit? And then there's a few other pieces within that statute to just encourage better discharge planning and better transition into adulthood. Thank you.
Senator Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that response, very thorough and enlightening. And until we, I'd like to think if those children did have a lawyer, they would at least know about it and be advised about it. But until that issue is taken care of, then maybe this other issue is a stopgap to change it to an opt-out rather than an opt-in. Just an observation from my part, and thank you to the testifiers for sharing their story. I appreciate that. The final thing I wanted to bring up, Mr. Chair, is that, and I had a brief meeting with you about this, to not spring it on you at the meeting, and the topic of survivor and SSI benefits for foster kids. I think it's an important issue. First and foremost, it's very important to setting these kids up for success. Secondarily, it's also a very interesting legal issue to me. But as I dig into it, it's a really complicated issue as well if you want to do it right. There's a lot of different considerations. And so my thought was that that issue would benefit from actually the work we're doing on this task force. I think this would be a good place to kind of go into that and figure out what is the right way to do it, what are some of the possibilities. So I know it's not on the agenda for today's meeting, and I appreciate that, but I think just my comment would be perhaps making this a separate agenda item at a future meeting might be a good idea. Thanks.
And thank you so very much for your comments and for your dialogue. That is something that you had already talked to me about, and we have a commitment to do that because that's a very important issue. Ms. Chamu, so I have a couple questions for you because your voice was so soft. Others have bionic ears, but sometimes I don't quite have bionic ears. You talked about resources for independent living resources. Then you talked about appreciating the $5 million for higher ed, but that there should be more money available for independent living skills. And then you talked about aging out and the eligibility being until 21 as opposed to, so you can continue to get that support. But it's the prong after that where you said something about counties, and I wasn't quite sure what you said.
Thank you, Chair. And this is regarding the state program, I believe you're referring to, for independent living skills and those funds that we give as a state, correct?
Yeah, so I caught that one, but
Okay.
But I'll talk to you again. So thank you so much, because I know how it is if I didn't, have a chance to, read my scribble and understand exactly what you said, but it was all wonderful and powerful. Here's a question that I do have. I know that we talked about the trauma and the difficulty because once, children go through foster care. Sometimes there's TPRs that happen, and then there's. It feels like, and maybe you can speak to this. It feels like there is a termination of the family as opposed to maybe the family member that you're experiencing some difficulty with. If you could just highlight that as far as whether that. What that feels like and what that is. And then last but certainly not least, after one is in foster care and they age out, is there any support for going back to family and trying to reconnect with family? I know that you talked about staying connected to your grandmother, which gave me chills. Can you speak to those two issues briefly? That would be helpful. Either one, anyone who wants to jump in there.
So I think you touched on, again, my name is Mariah Southwick. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. But I feel like exactly what you described is what takes place. Okay, my parents went through a TPR, and I did not see my brother or my father the entire, like, as soon as the TPR happened, there was no contact. And when I asked, so can I see my dad, or has he called to schedule a visit? A lot of times social workers would demand that it was his job to call and figure out who my social worker was in order to be able to be involved in my life. As far as like other instances in other family, I mean, uncles, aunts, a lot of people weren't made aware. They weren't even brought into meetings to be asked if they would be potential options. My dad has 8 or 9 siblings up here in the city's area. My uncle, Anthony Jones, Tony Jones, he runs a predominant company up here. He was never brought in and involved in any conversations regarding my placement. They never reached out to anyone in my dad's family. And then as far as my mother's family, I think throughout building this testimony was Ziwan from Foster Advocates and Ariana, it was brought to my attention that resources were never given to my grandmother to take me, or my aunt and uncle, who were also very successful down in the southern Minnesota region. And in fact, I think that it also built some anger in me and hurt, because on one side you have social services telling you, or child protection, guardian ad litems, they're all telling you these people don't want to be in your life, they're not calling to talk to you. But in reality, they don't know who to call. There was no resources or work done on the back end to inform them or make them aware or give them the opportunity. And so I think that that's something that in the state of Minnesota, even still today, within the last 5 years, I've witnessed it with 2 little girls down in Rochester who were adopted, and their family wanted them, showed up to every meeting, never given resources. It happens to be my significant other's nieces. And I just feel like, as I've watched that and my own experiences I've lived through, that's a type of pain that a lot of people will never understand, but the foster themselves begins to question their own identity, because you don't really know who you are on the back end.
Well, thank you. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one follow-up to that. Again, this seems like, and thank you for that story in that context, because again, this seems like, you know, when you're talking about termination of parental rights and not having contact with siblings and other family members, again, that's an issue that can be addressed if you have a competent lawyer. I mean, there's a lot of laws that are already in place that require that. And if you have a lawyer that's representing you as the child directly, and I like to think most guardian ad litems and social workers would do what's obligated and would want to encourage that contact with the siblings. I don't want to disparage them as a whole group. But if you have a lawyer that is specifically charged with advocating for the child directly, then a lot of these issues don't come up, because the lawyer then can bring a motion with the court or can bring up these issues at review hearings and kind of nudge everyone else to kind of make those efforts and to affirmatively reach out versus reactively waiting for someone to reach out. So again, I bring that back to if these kids had lawyers, a lot of these issues wouldn't come up, and that's a separate discussion, a bigger discussion, I suppose, than we have time for today. But I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions before we go to the next set of testifiers? We're going to Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, the good senator from Anoka County. The issue of, and I asked the question to Senator McQuaid, that gap, we've been talking about that for years, and I just thought, is there, like, we have ombudsmans for elderly, we have ombudsmans for education, we have ombudsmans, we have a protection and advocacy, we have a federal requirement under P&A to do, you know, disability law, Minnesota legal. But to your point, I'm wondering, is there a, do we know, do we have a ombudsman office? Yes? We do for foster youth. Tell me, David.
Representative Pinto.
And I'm sorry, I was, you know where I was with John Marty was having a, so I'm double hearing here. So
No, all good. No, and
I'll just go back and, you know, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Tell me. Representative Pinto.
Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I don't think it was brought up earlier, Senator Hoffman, so you did not miss it. And I think that the testifier, that Ms. Shimon may be able to talk more about it. But there was a foster youth. There is a foster youth ombudsperson relatively recently established, last couple of years, and I think it took a little while to fill that role. But there is, in fact, such a person, and I think who's doing quite good work. And so we do have that person working with us.
Mr. Chair, as a follow-up to Chair
Senator
Pinto.
Hoffman.
Chair Pinto, do you know the jurisdiction of that ombudsman's office and the financial responsibility? Can you give how does that look? Because that's clearly a doorway that should be utilized.
Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Hoffman. So the ombudsperson is Misty Kuntz, and the budget, I believe, has the last term flowed through the Children and Families Committee in the House and through the HHS Committee in the Senate, so in that area. And I probably can't speak as well, certainly as well as the ombudsperson could, to exactly her work, but certainly she's out there doing that work. And in fact, she's waving at us from the audience for those who cannot see over in the corner. So a nice connection to make. And Mr. Chair, actually, I wanted to make one quick comment. I know we want to move on, and I was going to save this for the end, but I'll save it. I'll say it now as long as I have the floor. Such powerful testimony from all three of you. Thank you so much. And I just kind of wanted to highlight for us, or just be thinking about kind of conceptually, right? We want to do everything we can to keep kids with their families, right? Meaning with their parents, if we possibly can. And there's so much more that we can do about that to prevent the removal of kids from their parents. But when that does have to happen, I think your testimony illustrates so powerfully for us something I hope we would know in our bones anyway, which is that then those kids should be with family otherwise, if at all possible. And so that's the connection then to the prior set of presentations, Mr. Chair, that you pulled together about the work that we're doing to make it be that kids can be placed with kin. So I'm going to have your words in my mind as I think about that, that sort of if we can't have kids be with their parents, we want to do everything that we can to have them be with relatives and with kin. If we really can't do that, then we take the next step. And yes, that means more representation. It's probably a lot of other things as well, including the things that we heard from Ms. Woolman's group. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to the testifiers.
And thank you to the testifiers for all your great work. Thank you for your heartfelt stories. It always allows us to put a face with the numbers. So people are not just looking at numbers, but seeing one's humanity. And so I want you to know that we see you. And so I really appreciate that. If there are no other questions or comments, thank you so very much. And to the person who is in the ombudsperson role of foster care, we certainly would love to get any additional information from you so that we can circulate that information as well. And maybe that's something that we're going to do too, to talk about what you all do. So thank you so very much. Thank you to the testifiers. I sincerely appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, you have presentation number 5, which is Champion Hill. Unfortunately, we're not going to go to that presentation simply because all of the testifiers are online. And you already know what challenges we've had thus far with the technology. So we're going to go now to the Family Resource Centers. We have a couple of testifiers, and I'm not sure which one is going to be first to kick us off, but if you introduce yourself for the record and go forward and then introduce your colleagues, that would be great.
Good morning. Senator Champion and Representative Pinto. For the record, my name is Angie Teese, and I serve as the Association of Minnesota Counties Child Wellbeing Policy Analyst. I'd like to, we're disappointed that the technology wouldn't allow Chapin Hall to be with us today. Much of their work serves as the underpinning and the foundation of the Family Resource Center model and is super significant and has the ability to really transform how we think about our system and the role that economic supports play in preventing the need for child protection. So I'm hopeful that they will either be able to share their information or we'll be able to have them back before this body or another body in the near future. But would ask that you keep that in mind as far as the national research and where the trends really are going around economic supports and linkages to prevention of child protection. Response in that in mind. In addition, I'm going to be running the PowerPoint, or try to. And then we did have another presenter, Jennifer Campo, who is a person with lived expertise out of Polk County. She serves as our FRC coordinator. I have her story. I will not be nearly as powerful as she is. She's quite the individual, but I will be reading that towards the end as well. So if you'll bear with me, I will get this up.
And who are you going to introduce for us that's going to go forward?
Good morning, Senator Champion and Representative Pinto. I'm Barb Weckman-Brecky, and I proudly represent Scott County as a county commissioner, and I'm the Association of Minnesota Counties' second vice president. Thank you for the time today, and thank you for this important work. I'm here today representing both Scott County and the Association of Minnesota Counties. And with me here today in person is Emma Mogendorf, Senior Program Director with the Sauer Family Foundation. Her remarks will follow mine, and then, as Angie said, she will read Jennifer's statement since Jennifer was going to be online today. Family resource centers are an evidence-informed, community-based method to help individuals, families, and communities access resources and programming. They provide enhanced accessibility. They provide a conduit for family-centered practice and community-centric linkages, and they make it easier for families to access community-based and government-sponsored supports like childcare, housing, transportation, food and economic supports, and programming in areas like mental health, substance abuse, and parenting. We truly believe this model is a strategy to help serve families better, reduce the need for involvement with child protection, the prevention that was talked about already today, and learn from individuals with lived expertise and successfully implement the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Disproportionality Act. Back in 2017, working closely with our staff leadership, the Scott County Board of Commissioners established a strategic plan, which included our goal of ending the need for child protection services. I know, a bold and audacious goal, right? This work began with a series of community conversations and ultimately turned into a community coalition focused on ending child abuse and neglect in Scott County. Again, go big or go home. So Together We Can is the name of our community coalition that continues to exist. And this community coalition was the impetus for establishing the first of now 4 family resource centers in Scott County. FRCs, as we call them, serve as a welcoming hub of community services and opportunities designed to strengthen families, all families. FRC activities and programs, typically provided at low or no cost to participants, are developed to reflect and be responsive to the specific needs, cultures, and interests of the population and communities we serve. They leverage existing government and community-based services and supports. FRCs can be community-based or school-based, and in some places they exist virtually or through a mobile site. In Scott County, we have 4 FRC locations in 4 different communities, 1 freestanding, 2 co-located with our libraries, and 1 co-located in a community food shelf. Over the past couple of years, we have changed FRC locations and added locations as we have worked with the community to determine the best physical locations to serve families in Scott County. FRC's work is based on a foundation of 5 protective factors and on elevating lived experience through parent advisory councils in leading and guiding the services and supports that operate within the site. So FRCs are naturally responsive to the community's needs and changes. Let me provide just a current snapshot of trends and what the data is showing in Scott County. You have data points in your packet, and you see some on the screen, but hot off the press is that 4,400 parents and children interacted with Scott County Family Resource Centers in 2024. We currently have over 20 community partners engaging in this work with us. They're local nonprofits, faith communities, and volunteers. We have culturally responsive programming and staff. We contract with culturally specific organizations to provide that cultural navigation and really walk beside families as they interact and experience the FRCs. We are looking forward to continuing this work and truly changing the lives of children and families. And we, the Scott County Board, we're truly delighted with what the beginning data suggests. I can't say shows yet, and we don't have that exact evidence, but what we're seeing is that we're improving outcomes for kids and families. We're shrinking the deepest end of our system, and we're providing opportunities upstream for individuals and families to connect to the community and services they need. Through establishing and growing these family resource centers, we are providing a community approach to supporting families while continuing access to child protection when it is the most appropriate response. I need to say that the family resource centers are preventative, they're community-based models of support, but if and when child protection services are needed, our staff still conduct the investigation, carry out the needed and required interventions according to law. But our goal is and continues to be to end that need for child protection services. While we haven't yet been able to conduct a full impact analysis and we're currently talking with potential evaluators, the trend suggests that something is happening that we all should be paying attention to. Not only are we seeing families better served, with less families needing traditional child protection services, less children in out-of-home placement, anecdotally, we're also seeing positive impact on our workforce, which also bears paying attention to as we all grapple with that high turnover rate in this very necessary workforce. This work needs sustaining. Currently, the Scott County FRCs are funded solely by our county. The costs are approximately $500,000 a year. We are thankful, very thankful, for the philanthropic funding by the Sauer Family Foundation. They assisted us in designing and getting our family resource centers off the ground. And Scott County is continuing to reinvest the dollars we are saving in out-of-home placement in prevention work like this. We recently redirected $160,000 from our out-of-home placement budget to supporting our family resource centers. But we'd like to see investment by the state partners in this family resource center model. We think it is the time. We believe strongly with the passage of the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Disproportionality Act and the work across our state to better support individuals and families in community, that there is an opportunity for our state partners to fund and sustain this critical work. The Scott County FRCs are currently eligible for the funding through the Community Resource Center grant. Thank you for that passage in 2023, but we have not yet been the recipient of that state grant funding. State investment in prevention services aimed at increasing service array and service access is critically needed to meet the goals of all of us, safe, thriving children. So I do invite you and all your legislative colleagues to come to Scott County and visit our family resource centers. Thank you, Representative Pinto, for visiting us. I think that was last summer. It would be an honor to host you. And now I will turn the floor over to Emma, who's from the Sauer Family Foundation.
Good morning.
Good morning. State your name for the record, and thank you, Commissioner Brecky.
My name is Emma Mogendorf. I'm the Senior Program Director with the Sauer Family Foundation. The Sauer Family Foundation's mission is to invest in strengthening the well-being of children so that they thrive in their families and communities. I'm here today because Scott County invited us to be part of their Family Resource Center vision. Sauer Family Foundation has been making grants in Minnesota for nearly 30 years. As a funder, when you hear about work that's community-based, upstream prevention, and grounded in participant voice, you pay attention. Family resource centers are an evidence-informed way to make services accessible to families where they need them, at a time they need them, in a welcoming space. There's going to be a map on your screen. It shows the spread of the Family Resource Center model in Minnesota. Counties and their community partners are eager to think about prevention work differently, alongside their communities and the families that live in them. We all know that in the long run, prevention is less expensive than deep-end services. This is a map which has expanded from the work that Scott County started in 2021. In partnership with the Association of Minnesota Counties, Sauer Family Foundation is now connected with more than 40 counties in Minnesota who are engaged at some level with Family Resource Center work. The counties, with the AMC leading, have established a formal network to share best practices and ensure fidelity to the framework. There's additional information on the emerging network of Minnesota Family Resource Centers in your materials. You heard from Commissioner Weckman-Brecky about the FRC model, but I'd like to review some of the key components. This national framework has 3 pillars. Services are based on the 5 protective factors for strengthening families. Family Resource Centers share quality standards for how they serve families in community. And each Family Resource Center has leadership from a Parent Advisory Council. The Family Resource Center model has strengthened community prevention across the nation. Recent congressional actions specified eligibility for FRCs through 4B funding. FRCs are an evidence-informed model. We don't need to keep building something new or to try new pilots. This framework is flexible. It is adaptive to geographic, economic, and community needs and positions parents with lived experience to lead and guide the work. Minnesota is privileged to have a robust philanthropic sector. However, total philanthropic dollars are less than 5% of the state budget. Philanthropy can and does do incredible things. In this case, we're proudly partnering with county leaders and their community partners to get started. We're funding community needs assessments, we're supporting innovation, and we're helping to bring this best practice to Minnesota. Public-private partnerships are strong because of braided funding. We're thankful for the state legislature dedicating funding to community resource centers, which we know FRCs are eligible for, but there's not currently enough or sustainable funding for this work. To date, the Sauer Family Foundation has invested over $5 million to support this emerging FRC network. We would like to ensure that funding for this is sustainable. By elevating existing community assets and committing to a shared philosophy, we don't have to do something new. Family Resource Centers demonstrate that it's possible to offer community-based prevention while reducing the footprint of government by empowering and funding communities to provide culturally responsive services with local agencies partnering in that work. The FRC model places parents at the center alongside the 5 protective factors, never losing sight of how services and programs need to be structured to serve families well. We're learning how to center lived experience in design and teaching systems to share power with the individuals and families we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. And who are we going to now?
I will try and do Jennifer Campo's testimony justice. Again, for the record, my name is Angie Teese, and I'm the Child Wellbeing Policy Analyst for the Association of Minnesota Counties, here today representing Jennifer Campo, who is a Family Resource Coordinator out of our Polk County Family Resource Center. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Campo. I am a Family Resource Coordinator with the East Grand Forks Family Resource Center in Polk County. I am also a member of the statewide Community Resource Center Advisory Council as a parent representative and a certified peer recovery specialist. It is an honor to be with you today. I'd like to share a little bit of my story and how important the FRC is to me. I grew up here in rural Minnesota in a lower middle class family. My mother came from a white upper middle class family, and my father was an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe and grew up very poor. Both of my parents worked very hard to provide a great life for my brother and I, working 5 jobs between the 2 of them at some points in time. Their hard work ethic and desire to raise us out of poverty left us vulnerable to mental and emotional neglect, as well as prolonged abuses of the worst kind of those they trusted to care for us. My father would also suffer from many crippling physical ailments due to the hard labor that he was forced to participate in most of his life and become a victim to the overprescribing of opioids, specifically OxyContin. It became normal for us to witness him withdrawing from these medications and start to tap into his extended family to supplement his prescription until it could be refilled. I would begin acting out at the age of 13 by running away from home, to which my parents' response was to call the police. Between the ages of 13 and 17, I would end up going to juvenile detention several times and consider myself as being raised by the system. Shortly after my 17th birthday, I would become pregnant with my first child. By some miracle, I graduated high school 6 months pregnant and would give birth to my son a week and a half after he turned 18. I was not prepared or ready to be a mother at that time. Because of how I was raised, I thought that if everything appeared to be good on the outside, everything was good. The next 10 years of our lives would be complete chaos, with several years of involvement with Child Protection Services, or CPS, as my substance use disorder changed from alcohol to methamphetamine. My continued poor choice in men for relationships that left me emotionally, mentally, and physically abused in front of my son. I would get a neglect charge through DHS as a result of this. I would like to note that through everything I just shared with you, my son was diagnosed with a rare form of liver disease called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency at the age of 3. I feel this is valuable to note because it required him to be on Social Security disability income and welfare so we could afford his medical treatments, which would eventually end up being a liver transplant. I utilized many social service resources that were available to us to survive, including attempting to go to college, and would make it a year and a half away from my bachelor's degree in social work, which would no longer be viable with the neglect charge from DHS. As my SUD, my substance use disorder, progressed and the trauma from the choices I made continued to pile up, I would lose custody of my son shortly after his 10th birthday in 2016. I would continue to struggle with SUD and also have 2 more children. I would work very hard to, again, utilize the system social service supports available to me to do better. CPS would become involved again with my daughter, and they would give me the ultimatum to choose between going to an inpatient treatment facility with her or moving back to my hometown and to live with my mother. I chose to live with my mother. In doing this, I managed to obtain 17 months of abstinence from substances, during which time I became pregnant again in February of 2020. I also worked 5 jobs during that time to try and dig us out of poverty. I would end up relapsing in April of 2021 and getting arrested and charged on October 29th of 2021. It was during this relapse that I realized that I was lacking the most through all of my hardship and poor decisions. I didn't have a community of people who understood what I was going through. I was able to finally find that in recovery in the room of Narcotics Anonymous in my hometown. Although I lost the apartment that we were living in, I was able to stay with extended family for a short period of time and gain access to stable housing again within a month, even though I had my vehicle seized through forfeiture due to the criminal charges. I was able to get one from another family member that would provide us the ability to get where we needed to go. I was also able to get into parenting classes that I found on my own to help me navigate parenting and recovery, and had access to early childhood education for both of my children while I navigated treatment meetings. Meetings with CPS, recovery meetings, and finding gainful employment. I was introduced to the Family Resource Center in the first month of its opening here in Polk County through my newly found career as a certified peer recovery specialist. When I saw the advertisements around our town for the Family Resource Center, something in me lit up. I knew that I had to be a part of this because I knew that the work they were doing is what I had been lacking in my life before recovery. Having a Family Resource Center could have prevented so much pain and suffering in the lives of myself and my children. I have made peace with that part of my life and now understand that through my role as a Family Resource Coordinator, I have the ability to utilize those experiences to work towards creating change and community for families here. She emphasizes this work matters to me, it's impactful, and it works. And thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of any of the testifiers? Seeing none, I want to tell you thank you so much for the work that you are doing as a collaborative with the Family Resource Centers. We sincerely appreciate it. And Commissioner we are really excited that you are here as well to talk about things from Scott County's perspective. And I know that this wonderful one has already visited. Is that right? And so, Chair Pinto, anything you want to say in closing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I certainly enjoyed the visit and really appreciated it and would encourage folks to check out the Community Resource Center that is closest to them, because it was a great experience. Mr. Chair, am I just closing this segment or closing the meeting? Just this segment. Yes, that's good. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so very much, and we appreciate you, and we look forward to our continued work together.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Members, just a couple housekeeping issues. Remember earlier that we had a presentation from Chaplin Hill, and they were online, so we're unable to have them present. But you have two packets in your folder. And one is for their long version and their short version. So we were uncertain if we were going to do the long version today or the short version. But you have both, so you can read that information and make sure that you become familiar with them. I also want to tell them thank you for their patience, and we'll try to find an opportunity to reschedule. Any questions before we get ready to go? Co-Chair, do you anything that you want to say in closing?
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for pulling this together. I feel like one thing I appreciated about today was the thoughtful approach from so many different angles. I think this area of child protection is one that kind of naturally lends itself, at least at first glance, to some kind of simplistic approaches to things. You know, we want to make sure the kids are kept safe, and we sort of maybe think about that in a simple way. Make sure to preserve family rights, maybe think about that in a simplistic way, and realizing that these are complicated and they're connected, and that we really need to be thoughtful in how we approach things, and I think that we heard that all throughout the morning. I'll maybe just say, Mr. Chair, and for members and members of the public as well, I think the odds are good that there will be another task force meeting that, because I know that the House will have the gavel next, and that would happen during this coming session. But I certainly would encourage members of the public, as you have continued ideas to improve our system for keeping kids safe and thriving, bring those as bills in the first instance, because that's kind of how the legislative process works, and those bills will go to the relevant committees, but then also make those of us on the task force aware of those ideas. This is an ongoing process that we have, and I very much appreciate getting to work with you, Chair, and with the members of the committee, and with others as well in making this happen. And so thank you so much for the morning.
All right, thank you, everyone. I want to first of all thank every person who presented today, every guest. We sincerely appreciate it. In your packets, the diversity of perspectives and approaches to this important topic. You'll find the Red Lake Tribal Nation report to the legislature on tribal child welfare. That was from 2022, so we're thankful for that. We also welcome Taylor again, and thank Shamika, who has been running around and trying to make sure that if the Senate thing doesn't work out, she'll certainly be a technological person, let me tell you that. So we sincerely appreciate everything that she does. Any questions from the body before we adjourn? Seeing none, we are adjourned.